There is a place where smoke still rises, not in the physical world, but in the collective memory of humanity. A place where the ghosts of scrolls dance in eternal flame, where the whispers of 10,000 lost voices echo through corridors that no longer exist. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine standing on the shores of the Mediterranean in the year 48 BCE. The air tastes of salt and ash. The greatest repository of human knowledge the world has ever known is burning. And with it, everything we might have become burns too. This is not just a story about a library. This is a story about amnesia on a civilizational scale, about the day humanity forgot its own genius, about the moment when the thread connecting us to our ancestors' deepest wisdom was severed, perhaps forever. We are, all of us, children of that fire, living in the shadow of what was lost, searching through the ashes for fragments of a truth we can barely remember. Tonight, we journey back to Alexandria, back to the great library, back to the day the light of the ancient world flickered and nearly went dark. What knowledge burned that day? What technologies were lost? What understanding of the cosmos, of medicine, of the human spirit itself vanished into smoke? And perhaps most haunting of all, what if we're still searching for answers that our ancestors already found, wrote down, and watched burn 3 times over in the flames of history? The questions hang in the air like smoke itself, and to answer them, we must first understand what Alexandria was, what the library was, and why its destruction echoes through every generation that came after, including ours. So come, walk with me through the marble halls of memory. Listen to the rustle of papyrus scrolls. Smell the cedar oil used to preserve them. Feel the weight of clay tablets pressed with cuneiform secrets. We're going back. Back to when the world's knowledge could fit in a single building. Back to when that building was the wonder of the world. Picture the Mediterranean in 331 BCE. Alexander the Great stands on the western edge of the Nile Delta, sand swirling around his boots, and points to a strip of land between the sea and Lake Mareotis. Here, he says, here we build a city that will outlive empires. He was 25 years old. He would be dead within 8 years, having conquered most of the known world. But in that moment, standing in the Egyptian wind, with the greatest architects of Greece beside him, Alexander the Great dreamed his most lasting dream, not of military conquest, not of political dominion, but of a city where knowledge from every corner of his vast empire would flow together like rivers meeting the sea. He called it Alexandria. The architect was Dinocrates of Rhodes, a man who thought in monuments. The plan was audacious, a city built on a grid, with wide boulevards running parallel to the sea, intersected by perpendicular streets, creating perfect blocks. 2 harbours connected by a causeway to the island of Pharos, where a lighthouse would rise so tall, so bright, that sailors could see its flame 30 miles out to sea. But Alexander died before he saw it built. The empire fractured. His generals carved up the world like hungry wolves. And Egypt fell to Ptolemy, a Macedonian general who understood something profound. Power built on swords is temporary. Power built on knowledge, that could last forever. Ptolemy I made himself Pharaoh of Egypt, and he made a decision that would change human history. He would build a library, not just any library, a universal library, a library that would contain every text, every scroll, every fragment of written human knowledge that existed on earth. The Mouseion, the Temple of the Muses, would be not just a library, but an institution of learning, a research centre, an academy, a place where the world's greatest minds could gather, study, debate, and push the boundaries of human understanding. The ambition was staggering, the execution nearly miraculous. By the time Ptolemy's son, Ptolemy II Philadelphus, took the throne, the project was in full force, ships coming into Alexandria's harbours were searched, not for contraband, not for weapons, for books. Any scroll found on any ship was confiscated, copied, and the copy returned to the owner. The original stayed in the library. They called it the Library from the Ships. Agents were sent to Athens, to Rome, to Carthage, to Babylon, to Persia, to India, anywhere writing existed. Their mission: acquire texts by any means necessary. Buy them, borrow them, copy them, steal them if you must, but bring the knowledge home to Alexandria. The library swelled, 40,000 scrolls, then 200,000, then, according to some ancient sources, upward of 500,000 scrolls, filling vast halls, organised by subject, catalogued by the first true librarians humanity ever knew. Imagine it, shelf after shelf stretching into shadow, scrolls wrapped in leather, tagged with small strips of papyrus identifying their contents. The complete works of Homer, Hesiod, Sappho, the mathematical treatises of Euclid, written in Alexandria itself, the astronomical observations of Babylon spanning thousands of years, the medical knowledge of Hippocrates, the philosophical wisdom of Plato and Aristotle. Aristotle's personal library was acquired in Tyre, Egyptian papyri recording 3,000 years of history, Persian fire worship texts, Indian mathematics and astronomy. Jewish scriptures, the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, was created in Alexandria by 72 scholars working in 72 cells, emerging miraculously with identical translations, or so the legend says. African oral traditions transcribed for the first time, maps of lands barely discovered, botanical studies, chemical formulas, engineering diagrams, poetry in languages long dead. Every human endeavour, every spark of genius, every question asked and answered across the ancient world, gathered under one roof. The scholars came too, drawn like moths to an impossible flame. The Mouseion offered them everything: free room and board, tax exemption, access to the greatest library on earth, and the freedom to think, to argue, to discover without constraint. They walked the covered marble colonnades, debating under the Egyptian sun. They dissected cadavers in anatomy theatres. The first systematic human dissections in history happened in Alexandria. They tracked the stars from observatories built on the roof. Euclid taught geometry there, establishing principles we still use today. Eratosthenes measured the circumference of the earth with stunning accuracy, using nothing but shadows, geometry, and the distance between Alexandria and Aswan. He was off by less than 2%. In 240 BCE, without computers, without satellites, just observation and mathematics and human genius. Herophilus mapped the human nervous system. Aristarchus described the circulation of blood, 1700 years before William Harvey would get credit for discovering it in Europe. Aristarchus of Samos proposed that the Earth revolves around the Sun, 1800 years before Copernicus. Archimedes studied there. Hero of Alexandria invented the first steam engine, a toy, a curiosity, but functional. The principles were understood. In the 1st century CE, Alexandria had steam power. Imagine if that knowledge had spread. Imagine if it had been developed. The Industrial Revolution could have happened in Rome. But it didn't. Ctesibius invented the force pump, hydraulic systems, the first accurate clocks using water. Apollonius of Perga developed the mathematics of conic sections. Hypatia, centuries later, a woman philosopher and mathematician, taught Neoplatonic philosophy and edited the astronomical work of Ptolemy, not the king, but the astronomer, who created the Almagest in Alexandria, mapping the heavens with such precision that his star catalogue remained the standard for 1,200 years. The library was alive. It breathed knowledge. It metabolized human curiosity and exhaled understanding. In Alexandria, Jewish scholars debated Greek philosophers, who challenged Egyptian priests, who learned from Persian mages, who traded ideas with Indian mathematicians. For 600 years, Alexandria was the brain of the world, and the library was its memory. But memory is fragile, and knowledge, it turns out, can burn. The first fire came in 48 BCE. Julius Caesar didn't mean to do it. That's what makes it almost worse. It wasn't an act of barbarian destruction, of anti-intellectual rage. It was collateral damage, an accident, a tragedy born of civil war and tactical necessity. The stage is this. Caesar has arrived in Alexandria, chasing his rival Pompey the Great in the Roman Civil War. Pompey is already dead, murdered on the orders of the boy king Ptolemy I as a gift to Caesar. But Caesar stays. He's intrigued by Egypt, and more than intrigued by Ptolemy's sister, Cleopatra VII, who arrives rolled in a carpet and emerges as one of history's most fascinating figures. Caesar sides with Cleopatra in the Ptolemaic civil war. Ptolemy Eratosthenes' forces attack. Caesar's legions are outnumbered, trapped in the palace district of Alexandria, with the harbour at their back. They need to control the harbour. The Egyptian fleet, 400 ships, threatens them. Caesar makes a decision. Burn the fleet. His soldiers set fire to the Egyptian ships. The fire spreads. Wind carries sparks. Buildings along the waterfront ignite. And somewhere, in the chaos, in the smoke, in the confusion of a city at war, the fire reaches the library, or part of it, or warehouses connected to it. The ancient sources conflict. They always do when tragedy strikes. Some say the great library itself burned. Others say it was only warehouses near the docks, filled with scrolls waiting to be catalogued or copied. Seneca the Younger, writing a century later, claims 40,000 scrolls burned. Plutarch says the fire destroyed the great library. Dio Cassius claims the library survived, but bookstore houses were lost. We may never know the precise truth. But this we know. Something was lost that day. Smoke rose over Alexandria. Papyrus burns hot and fast. Ink turns to ash. Knowledge becomes carbon, becomes air, becomes nothing. Caesar felt the guilt of it. He ordered copies made of texts from Pergamum to replenish the library. But you cannot replace what you don't know was there. You cannot copy what burned to ash. The first wound had been dealt. The library limped on. For 3 more centuries, scholars still came. The Mouseion still functioned. The daughter library, the Serapeum, housed in the temple of Serapis, took on greater importance. But Alexandria was changing. The Ptolemaic dynasty ended with Cleopatra's suicide in 30 BCE. Egypt became a Roman province. The world's intellectual centre was shifting north, to Rome, to Constantinople. Christianity rose. The old pagan ways, the worship of Serapis, the reverence for Isis and Osiris, began to seem like idolatry to a new generation of believers. The Mouseion, with its devotion to the Muses, its embrace of Greek philosophy, its preservation of texts sacred to a dozen different faiths, began to seem problematic. In 272 CE, the Emperor Aurelian attacked Alexandria, putting down a rebellion. The Bruchion, the royal quarter where the great library stood, was destroyed in the fighting. Most historians believe this was the death blow. If Caesar's fire was the first wound, Aurelian's war was the killing stroke. But the story doesn't end there. The Serapeum remained. The daughter library, perhaps a tenth the size of the original, still held scrolls, still welcomed scholars. Hypatia taught there in the late 4th century, her lectures drawing pagans, Christians and Jews alike united in pursuit of knowledge. Until 391 CE. The Roman Emperor Theodosius I issued a decree, destroy the pagan temples. Christianity was now the official religion of the empire. The old gods were illegal. The Serapeum, housing the last fragments of the ancient library, was a temple to Serapis, a pagan god. Bishop Theophilus of Alexandria led a Christian mob through the streets. They stormed the Serapeum. They destroyed the statues. They smashed the astronomical instruments. They tore down the library shelves. And they burned what remained of the ancient collection. Socrates of Constantinople, a Christian historian writing shortly after, described it with a mixture of triumph and sadness. The last refuge of the old knowledge was gone. 24 years later, in 415 CE, a Christian mob killed Hypatia. They dragged her from her chariot, stripped her naked, scraped her flesh from her bones with ostraca, broken pottery, and burned her remains. Her crime? Being a woman, being a teacher, being a pagan philosopher in an increasingly intolerant age. With her died the last echo of Alexandria's golden age. Some sources claim a final library survived until the Arab conquest of Alexandria in 641 CE. The story goes that Caliph Omar, when asked what to do with the books, replied, "If these books agree with the Quran, they are unnecessary. If they disagree, they are heretical. Either way, burn them." The scrolls supposedly were used as fuel to heat the city's 4,000 bathhouses for 6 months. Modern historians doubt this story. It appears in sources written centuries later. But true or not, it reveals something about how humanity remembers the loss as a deliberate act, as ignorance choosing to destroy knowledge, as fear winning over curiosity. The truth is more complex and perhaps more tragic. The Library of Alexandria didn't die in a single fire. It died the death of 1,000 cuts: war, neglect, religious intolerance, political upheaval, budget cuts. Yes, even in the ancient world, funding for scholarship dried up. Scrolls were not replaced. Roofs leaked. Papyrus decayed. Scholars stopped coming. Students stopped learning. The fire that destroyed the library wasn't a single event. It was a process, a civilizational decision, conscious or not, that preserving the past mattered less than winning the present. And so, the light went out. Not with a bang, not even with a whimper. With silence. With the slow settling of dust in empty halls. With the last untended scroll crumbling to powder. With the final scholar closing the door behind him and not coming back. What did we lose? It's the question that haunts every historian, every scholar who studies the ancient world. We have fragments, shadows, references in later texts to works that no longer exist. And from these fragments, we can begin to glimpse what burned. Sophocles wrote 120 plays. 7 survive. Euripides wrote 92 plays. 19 survive. Aeschylus wrote perhaps 90 plays. 7 survive. The great dramatists of Athens, the foundation of Western theatre, we have less than 10% of their output. The rest burned, or moulded, or was recycled into grocery lists because papyrus was expensive and old texts made good scrap material. Sappho of Lesbos, considered in her own time the equal of Homer, wrote 9 books of lyric poetry. We have fragments, pieces, verses quoted by later authors who had access to complete texts. Roughly 600 lines survive out of perhaps 10,000. The rest is gone. The library had complete collections of both, all of Sappho, all of Sophocles, every play, every poem, every word. Gone. Berossus, a Babylonian priest, wrote the Babyloniaca in the 3rd century BCE, a history of Babylon drawn from temple records spanning thousands of years. He had access to cuneiform texts dating back to the reign of Sargon of Akkad, perhaps the first empire builder in human history, ruling around 2300 BCE. Berossus's work could have connected us directly to the first civilizations, the first cities, the birth of writing itself. We have fragments quoted in other works. The original is lost. Manetho, an Egyptian priest living in Alexandria, wrote the Aegyptiaca, a history of Egypt organized into 31 dynasties, drawing on hieroglyphic records in Egyptian temples. His work was the source for the dynastic chronology we still use today for ancient Egypt. But we don't have his actual text. We have later writers quoting him, summarizing him, sometimes misunderstanding him. The complete knowledge of Egyptian chronology, as understood by Egyptians themselves, was in that library. Gone. The Punic Wars, Rome's great struggle with Carthage that shaped the ancient Mediterranean, we know from the Roman perspective. We have Livy, we have Polybius. But Carthage also produced historians. They wrote their own accounts. Those texts were in Alexandria. We'll never hear Carthage's side of the story. The Library of Alexandria held texts in languages that are now extinct: Etruscan literature, Gaulish histories, North African chronicles. When those scrolls burned, the languages died with them. We can't even read Etruscan properly anymore. We have short inscriptions, tomb markers. But the literature, the poetry, the historical records that could have given us the key to understanding the language, they were in Alexandria. And they burned. Scientific knowledge. This is where the loss becomes almost painful to contemplate. Hipparchus of Nicaea, the greatest astronomer of antiquity, worked in Alexandria. He compiled a star catalogue of at least 850 stars, measuring their positions with extraordinary accuracy. He discovered the precession of the equinoxes, the slow wobble in Earth's axis that causes the position of stars to shift over millennia. He developed trigonometry. His work was the foundation for all astronomy that followed. We don't have his original texts. We have Ptolemy's Almagest, written 3 centuries later, which built on Hipparchus, but also obscured him. How much more did Hipparchus know? What observations did he make that Ptolemy ignored or couldn't understand? We'll never know. Eratosthenes didn't just measure the Earth. He made a map of the known world, a 3-dimensional geography accounting for the curvature of the Earth. He calculated longitude and latitude. He described places we've only recently rediscovered. His geography was used for centuries, but eventually lost. We have a few references in other works. The map itself, gone. What did he know about the extent of Africa, about the size of the Atlantic? There are tantalizing hints in later sources that ancient geographers knew more about the world than we give them credit for. The Piri Reis map, created in 1513, seems to show Antarctica, but Antarctica wasn't discovered until 1820. Scholars believe the Piri Reis map was based on earlier sources, perhaps ultimately derived from maps housed in Alexandria. If true, the ancients mapped the world more completely than medieval Europeans. And we lost it. Medical texts. The loss here is almost criminal. Herophilus performed human dissections and described the anatomy of the brain, the eye, the liver, the reproductive organs with precision that wouldn't be matched until the Renaissance. His work was legendary, but we have only second-hand quotations. The actual texts, the actual observations, the diagrams, the surgical techniques, lost. Aristarchus understood blood circulation. He described how blood flows through arteries and veins, how the heart pumps it, how it nourishes the body. But later, physicians rejected his findings. Galen, the most influential medical authority of antiquity and the Middle Ages, believed blood was created in the liver and consumed by the organs. He was wrong, and his errors shaped European medicine for 1500 years because Erasistratus's correct understanding was lost in the fire. How many people died because of that lost knowledge? How many centuries of medical progress were squandered because the library burned? And then there are the really haunting losses. The texts we know existed but can only imagine. Aristarchus of Samos proposed heliocentrism, the Earth revolving around the Sun, in the 3rd century BCE. We know this from a short reference in Archimedes and a few other sources. But Aristarchus wrote an entire treatise explaining his theory, presenting his evidence, making his case. That text existed. It was in Alexandria. What was his reasoning? How did he calculate the distances involved? Did he understand gravity? Did he explain why, if the Earth moves, we don't feel it? A question that wouldn't be adequately answered until Newton? We'll never know. The text is gone, and heliocentrism had to be rediscovered 1800 years later. The Library in Alexandria held texts that suggested mechanical computers. Hero of Alexandria described complex machines, automatic doors, coin-operated holy water dispensers, even a steam-powered rotating sphere that could have been developed into an actual engine. The Antikythera mechanism, discovered in a shipwreck in 1901, proved that ancient Greeks could build astronomical computers of stunning complexity. It dates to around 100 BCE. If that level of technology existed, if it could be built, then the knowledge of how to build it must have been written down. Must have been taught, must have been preserved. Where would such knowledge have been kept? In the library? What other machines did they build? What other technologies did they develop? We keep discovering that the ancients were more sophisticated than we assumed. Every new archaeological find pushes back the date of some invention or discovery. But we're rediscovering. We're finding fragments. The complete knowledge was in Alexandria, and it burned. But perhaps the greatest loss isn't in the specific texts. Perhaps it's in what those texts represented. The idea that all human knowledge could be gathered in one place, that a person could walk into the library and find answers to any question, that humanity's collective wisdom was preserved, protected, passed down from one generation to the next. The Library of Alexandria was more than a building full of scrolls. It was a promise that knowledge mattered, that the past mattered, that what one generation learned wouldn't have to be painfully relearned by the next. It was a promise that we would remember. And when the library burned, that promise burned with it. The Middle Ages in Europe weren't called the Dark Ages because the sun stopped shining. They were dark because knowledge stopped flowing. The vast majority of classical texts were lost. The few that survived did so by accident, a copy in a distant monastery, a fragment quoted in a commentary, a translation into Arabic preserved in Baghdad while Europe forgot. For 1,000 years, European civilization limped along with scraps, a fragment of Aristotle here, a partial copy of Euclid there. It wasn't until the 12th century Renaissance, when Arabic translations of Greek texts began flowing back into Europe, that Western civilization remembered it had once known more, and even then we only recovered a fraction. Modern scholars estimate that we possess less than 1% of the literature of antiquity. Less than 1%. Everything else, 99% of the poems, plays, histories, scientific treatises, philosophical dialogues, mathematical proofs, medical texts, engineering manuals, is gone. Most of it was in Alexandria, and it burned. We carry the wound of that loss with us still. We are a civilization with amnesia. We know something is missing. We can feel the gap in our knowledge, like a tongue probing the space where a tooth used to be. We have references to texts we'll never read, names of authors we'll never know. Questions that were answered once, but now hang unanswered in the air. What did we forget? What technologies were lost? There's a persistent theory among some researchers that ancient civilizations achieved a level of technological sophistication that we've only recently matched. Precision machining, advanced metallurgy, acoustic engineering, concrete that outlasts our modern formulas. Roman concrete still stands after 2,000 years, while modern concrete crumbles in decades. They knew something we forgot. Was the knowledge of how they did it written down? Was it in the library? What about medicine? Ancient surgeons performed cataract operations, amputations, even brain surgery. Trepanation, the drilling of holes in the skull, was performed with surprising survival rates. How much did they understand about anesthesia, about infection, about the body's healing processes? We've discovered ancient prescriptions that when tested actually work using modern scientific analysis, we've found that some ancient remedies contain genuinely effective compounds. They weren't just making it up, they knew. But the comprehensive texts, the full medical knowledge of the ancient world. It was in Alexandria. What about consciousness? Philosophy? The ancients spent millennia thinking about the nature of reality, the soul, the divine. The Eleusinian mysteries in Greece promised initiates a vision of death and rebirth. The Egyptian Book of the Dead guided souls through the afterlife. The Orphic traditions taught reincarnation and spiritual purification. These weren't just religions. They were psychological and spiritual technologies, methods of transforming consciousness. The library held texts on these mysteries. Initiates wrote down their insights. Philosophers analysed the experiences. It was all there, catalogued, preserved, lost. Some researchers believe the ancients understood things about consciousness that we're only beginning to rediscover. The use of psychoactive compounds in religious rituals. The psychological effects of ritual and symbol. The power of myth to shape human experience. Carl Jung spent his life trying to reconstruct this ancient wisdom from fragments. But he was working with scraps. The complete knowledge. It burned in Alexandria. What about history itself? Ancient peoples kept chronicles going back thousands of years. Egyptian priest scribes recorded dynastic histories with dates, names, events. Babylonian astronomers kept sky charts spanning centuries, tracking planetary movements, eclipses, comets. The Maya in the New World did the same. But we don't know if any American texts ever reached Alexandria. If they did, we've lost the evidence of pre-Columbian contact. But for the Old World, Alexandria was the archive. And when it burned, we lost the unbroken chain of human memory stretching back to the first cities, the first kings, the first priests who looked at the stars and saw patterns. We know there were kings before Menes unified Egypt around 3100 BCE. Egyptian tradition spoke of dynasties stretching back 10,000 years. Myth, exaggeration, or the dimly remembered truth of cultures that rose and fell before writing even began. Manetho had access to the temple records. He could read the hieroglyphs that we couldn't decipher until Champollion in 1822. He wrote it all down, and it burned. Plato spoke of Atlantis in the Timaeus and Critias. He claimed the story came from Solon, who heard it from Egyptian priests. The priest told Solon that Greek civilization was young, that there had been many rises and falls of human culture, that 9,000 years before, around 9600 BCE, a great civilization fell. Modern archaeology scoffs. There's no evidence of advanced civilization that early, but we keep finding older and older sites. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey dates to 9600 BCE, exactly when Atlantis supposedly fell. It's a massive temple complex that required organization, labor, planning, and a reason to build that we don't yet understand. We're finding more. Every decade pushes back the date of the first civilization. What did the Egyptians know? What records did they keep? What stories did Manetho write down? They were in the Library of Alexandria. We'll never know. And yet. Here is where despair turns to something else, something that might, if we squint, look like hope. Because knowledge, it turns out, is harder to destroy than we think. It wants to survive. It finds a way. And while the Library of Alexandria burned, fragments of its wisdom scattered across the world, carried by fleeing scholars, copied by distant scribes, translated into other languages, hiding in unexpected places. The story of how ancient knowledge survived the Dark Ages and returned to Europe is itself an epic, a tale of desperate preservation, forbidden learning, and cultural exchange across enemy lines. When the Roman Empire fell in the West in 476 CE, literacy collapsed. The infrastructure that supported learning, schools, libraries, scriptoriums crumbled with the empire. But the empire survived in the east. Byzantium, later called Constantinople, remained a beacon of learning. Greek texts that would have been lost were preserved in Greek in Constantinople. But there was another preservation effort, one that often goes untold: the Islamic Golden Age. When Muslim armies conquered the Middle East, North Africa, and Spain in the 7th and 8th centuries, they encountered the remnants of ancient learning. Syrian Christians in places like Edessa and Baghdad had been translating Greek texts into Syriac and Arabic. Persian scholars had preserved scientific texts. Indian mathematicians had developed algebra and the decimal system. The Abbasid caliphs, particularly Al-Ma'mun in the 9th century, established the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, a conscious attempt to recreate the Library of Alexandria. They sent agents across the known world to acquire texts. They paid translators in gold to render Greek, Persian and Sanskrit works into Arabic. They created a new Islamic civilization built on the foundation of ancient knowledge. Aristotle's complete works, lost in Europe, were preserved in Arabic. Galen's medical texts, Ptolemy's astronomy, Euclid's geometry, not just preserved, studied, analysed, improved upon. Muslim scholars didn't just copy, they advanced. Al-Khwarizmi developed algebra. Ibn Sina, Avicenna, wrote the Canon of Medicine, the most comprehensive medical text of the medieval period. Ibn al-Haytham, al-Hazen, pioneered the scientific method and wrote the Book of Optics, advancing the understanding of light and vision far beyond anything the Greeks achieved. For 400 years, while Europe fumbled in the dark, Islamic civilization carried the torch of ancient learning. And then, slowly, it came back to Europe. Through Spain, where Muslim, Christian and Jewish scholars worked together in cities like Toledo to translate Arabic texts back into Latin. Through Sicily, where Norman kings patronized Greek and Arabic scholars. Through the Crusades, ironically, as Christian and Muslim armies fought, their scholars exchanged ideas. The 12th century Renaissance began with a translation movement. European scholars rediscovering Aristotle in Latin translations from Arabic translations from Greek. They were reading the classics through 2 layers of translation, sometimes misunderstanding, sometimes adding their own insights, but reading, learning, remembering. The University of Bologna was founded in 1088, Oxford in 1096, Paris in 1150. These weren't just religious institutions, they were centres of learning, places where the rediscovered texts of antiquity were studied alongside theology. By the 13th century, Thomas Aquinas was synthesizing Aristotle with Christian doctrine. By the 14th century, the Renaissance was dawning in Italy. And then came an unexpected gift. In 1453, Constantinople fell to the Ottoman Turks. Greek scholars fled west, carrying manuscripts. Texts that had survived in Byzantine libraries for 1,000 years suddenly flooded into Italy. The Renaissance, already beginning, exploded. The printing press, invented by Gutenberg in 1440, made it possible to copy texts faster than ever before. Knowledge couldn't be lost again. There were too many copies, too many scholars, too many libraries. The amnesia was lifting. Today, we've recovered more than those refugees could have imagined. Archaeology has given us primary sources the ancients themselves didn't have. We can read cuneiform tablets from Mesopotamia, something even the Library of Alexandria couldn't do, because cuneiform was already an ancient, forgotten script by Ptolemaic times. We can read hieroglyphs, understand Linear B, decipher Mayan glyphs. We're reading texts that were old when Alexandria was young. The Rosetta Stone, discovered in 1799, gave us the key to hieroglyphs. Suddenly, 3,000 years of Egyptian history, written on temple walls and papyrus fragments, became readable. We're recovering ancient knowledge directly from the source. Göbekli Tepe. Chatal Hoyuk, the Indus Valley Cities. Underwater archaeology revealing Bronze Age shipwrecks with their cargoes intact. Ground-penetrating radar finding lost cities beneath the jungle. Satellite imagery showing ancient roads and structures invisible from the ground. We're finding what was lost. Not everything. Never everything. But more than we dared hope. And there's another kind of survival, the ideas themselves. Geometry is eternal. Euclid's Elements, whether we have his original text or not, was recompiled from copies and student notes. The mathematics is unchanged. The logic still holds. You can destroy the book, but you can't unprove the Pythagorean theorem. Medical knowledge, lost and rediscovered, advances. We may not have Herophilus's texts, but we have human anatomy itself. Dissection reveals the same truths he found. We're not starting from nothing. We're rediscovering what was always there. Philosophy, the great questions, don't change. What is the good life? What is justice? What is the nature of reality? Socrates asked these questions. We're still asking them. And in asking, we're continuing the conversation that began in Athens and moved to Alexandria and never really ended, even when the books burned. The Library of Alexandria is gone, but the spirit of Alexandria, the hunger to know, the drive to understand, the belief that all knowledge is worth preserving, survives in every library, every university, every Wikipedia page, every effort to document and share what we know. We're building a new Library of Alexandria. It's called the Internet. It's imperfect, it's chaotic, it's full of misinformation mixed with truth, but it's also the largest repository of human knowledge that has ever existed, accessible to more people than the ancient library ever was. And unlike the Library of Alexandria, it has no single point of failure. Burn one server and 1,000 others hold the same information. The knowledge is distributed, replicated, backed up. It can't all burn anymore. We've learned that lesson. But let's go deeper. Let's ask the question that haunts every student of lost knowledge. What if the library's greatest secrets weren't just lost? What if they were hidden? There's a persistent tradition in esoteric circles that before the final burning, before the last destruction, initiates rescued the most sacred texts. That the deepest knowledge, the mysteries, the spiritual technologies, the understanding of consciousness and cosmos that went beyond mere science, was saved by those who knew its value. These traditions claim that libraries still exist in hidden places, that under the sands of Egypt, in sealed chambers beneath the Sphinx, or in lost cities of the Sahara, ancient texts wait in the darkness. That in Himalayan monasteries, monks preserve palm leaf manuscripts that predate Alexandria. That in Vatican vaults, texts confiscated from heretics and pagans sit unread, too dangerous to reveal. Is there truth to these stories? Or are they the wishful thinking of a civilization that can't accept the magnitude of its loss? We know some texts were hidden successfully. The Nag Hammadi Library, Gnostic Christian texts hidden in a jar in the Egyptian desert around 400 CE, was discovered in 1945. 13 codices, 52 texts, including the Gospel of Thomas, revealing an entire branch of early Christianity we barely knew existed. They were hidden from the authorities, from the orthodoxy that was burning heretical works. They survived. The Dead Sea Scrolls, hidden in caves near Qumran around 70 CE, were discovered in 1947. They revealed how Judaism was practiced in the Second Temple period, the diversity of thought that existed before Rabbinic Judaism standardized. They survived. If these texts survived by being hidden, what else might be hidden still? There are reports, unverified, tantalizing, of archaeological discoveries that were never announced, of chambers beneath the pyramids that were opened and resealed, of texts recovered and taken to private collections or government warehouses, of knowledge deemed too dangerous, too disruptive to release. Conspiracy? Probably. The archaeology establishment is sceptical for good reason. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And yet, we keep finding things we thought were lost. Every few years, a new discovery. A text fragment in a cave. A shipwreck yielding scrolls preserved in lead cylinders. A previously unknown manuscript in a monastery library. The Archimedes palimpsest, a 10th century copy of Archimedes' text that was erased in the 13th century and overwritten with prayers. The original text was invisible, lost. But in 1998, using modern imaging technology, scholars recovered the erased Archimedes text, from a book that had been destroyed. Even destruction isn't always final. Could there be more? Hidden in private collections, sitting misidentified in museum storage, buried in archaeological sites not yet excavated? Almost certainly, yes. We'll never recover everything, but we might recover more than we think. And perhaps that's the real triumph over the burning of Alexandria. Not that we saved everything, but that we never stopped looking, never stopped trying to remember, never accepted that the loss was total and final. And now we come to the deepest question of all, the one that ties this ancient tragedy to our present moment, to you sitting here listening to this story of smoke and ash and lost wisdom. Why does it matter? Why does the burning of a library 2,000 years ago still hurt? Why do we care what was lost? We have more knowledge now than Alexandria ever held. We have instant access to more information than any ancient scholar could dream of. We've split the atom, mapped the genome, landed on the moon. Why mourn what burned? Because we understand something the ancients knew and we almost forgot. Memory is identity. A person without memory has no self. A civilization without memory has no soul. We are what we remember. The stories we tell ourselves about who we are, where we came from, what we've learned. When the library burned, part of our collective memory died. Part of our story was erased. And we've been trying to reconstruct it ever since, like an amnesia victim piecing together fragments of a forgotten life. But here's the deeper truth. The Library of Alexandria is still burning. Not literally, but metaphorically, spiritually, culturally. It's burning right now. How many languages die each year? With them die entire ways of seeing the world, entire knowledge systems about plants and animals and weather and human nature that took millennia to develop. Indigenous peoples worldwide carry knowledge in oral traditions, knowledge about the Amazon rainforest, about traditional medicine, about sustainable living. And as their languages die, as their cultures are absorbed into global modernity, that knowledge vanishes. It's burning. How many scientific papers are published each year that no one reads? Buried in journals, locked behind paywalls, written in such specialized jargon that only a handful of experts can understand them. Knowledge created and immediately lost in the noise. How many books are printed and pulped when they don't sell? How many hard drives die, taking unpublished manuscripts with them? How many grandparents pass away, carrying stories of the old days, techniques, recipes, songs that no one thought to record? Every day, somewhere, knowledge is lost. Memory fades. The library burns. But, and this is the revelation, we can choose to be the builders instead of the burners. We can choose to preserve rather than destroy, to remember rather than forget, to value knowledge for its own sake, not for its immediate utility. The spirit of Alexandria wasn't in the building. It wasn't in the scrolls. It was in the idea that knowledge matters. All knowledge, from every culture, in every language. That understanding the world in all its complexity is worth the effort. That preserving what we learn for future generations is a sacred duty. We can rebuild the library, not in Alexandria, everywhere, in every school, every library, every hard drive and server and cloud backup, in every conversation where knowledge is shared, In every moment someone says, "Let me teach you what I know," or "Let me learn what you know." The Library of Alexandria fell because it was centralized. It was a single point of failure. One city, one building, one collection that could burn. The new Library of Alexandria must be distributed, redundant, accessible to all, not hoarded by the elite, but shared freely. Open source, Creative Commons, public domain, the democratization of knowledge that the ancient world never achieved. And it's happening. Wikipedia, Internet Archive, Project Gutenberg, Google Books, open access journals, free online courses. Every day, more of human knowledge becomes freely available to anyone with an internet connection. We're building it. The Great Library, scattered across 1 million servers, backed up in bunkers and hard drives and the memories of billions of people. It can't all burn anymore, but, and this is crucial, we must also remember what made Alexandria special. It wasn't just storage, it was synthesis. It was bringing together scholars from different cultures, different backgrounds, different perspectives, and letting them argue and learn from each other and create new knowledge that none of them could have created alone. The library was alive because it was a community, a meeting place, a marketplace of ideas. Our new library must be the same, not just an archive, but a living conversation, not just preserving the past, but creating the future. So let me tell you what I think the real lesson of Alexandria is. Not despair at what was lost, but determination to never lose it again. And beyond that, a recognition that knowledge is fragile and precious and irreplaceable. The burning of the library was a wound, but a wound can heal. And in healing, it can make us stronger, more conscious, more careful. We know now what we didn't know then, that knowledge doesn't preserve itself, that every generation must choose to value learning, to fund education, to protect libraries and archives and universities. That intellectual freedom matters, that diversity of thought matters, that bringing together different cultures, different perspectives, different ways of knowing creates something greater than any single tradition can achieve alone. We know that burning books is never justified, that suppressing ideas, no matter how heretical or dangerous they seem, impoverishes us all, that the solution to bad speech is more speech, not silence, that even ideas we disagree with deserve to be preserved, argued against, understood in their context. We know that technology can help us, but it's not enough. The internet can store information, but it can't force people to read it, can't make them curious, can't instill in them the value of knowledge for its own sake. That still requires teachers, still requires parents who read to their children, still requires a culture that celebrates learning. And we know something else, something the ancients knew deeply, and we're only beginning to remember, that knowledge isn't just facts, it's not just data, it's wisdom, it's understanding. It's the ability to connect disparate pieces of information into meaning, into insight, into action that makes the world better. The Library of Alexandria held facts, but it also held wisdom, the wisdom of how to live well, how to govern justly, how to heal the sick, how to observe the stars and wonder at the cosmos, how to write a play that moves people to tears, how to prove a theorem that reveals the hidden order beneath chaos. That wisdom is what we truly lost. Not the scrolls themselves, but the accumulated understanding of hundreds of generations of thinkers, each building on what came before. And here's the revelation that brings us full circle. We can recreate that wisdom. Not identically, the specific insights of Sappho, the particular proofs of Euclid, the exact formulas of Hero, those are gone. But the capacity to generate wisdom, to think deeply, to wonder and question and discover, that capacity is eternal. It's in us. It's in every human being born with curiosity and given the chance to learn. The Library of Alexandria was built by humans, It was a human achievement, and if humans built it once, we can build it again. Better, bigger, more resilient, more accessible, more wise. We are, all of us, the children of Alexandria, heirs to its dream, carrying its mission forward into a future the ancient scholars couldn't imagine, but would, I think, approve of. Every time you open a book, you're rebuilding the library. Every time you share what you know, you're rebuilding the library. Every time you ask a question, seek an answer, wonder at the mystery of existence, you're rebuilding the library. Every time you preserve a story, document a technique, teach a skill, pass on wisdom to the next generation, you're rebuilding the library. It never really burned. It just scattered. And now it's gathering again. In you, in me, in everyone who chooses knowledge over ignorance, understanding over fear, wisdom over willful blindness. The Library of Alexandria is rising from its ashes, not in one place, in every place, not in one language, in every language, not for the privileged few, for everyone. And this time, we won't let it burn. Close your eyes again. Imagine you're standing in Alexandria, but not the Alexandria of 48 BCE, watching smoke rise over the harbour. Imagine the Alexandria of tomorrow, of 100 years from now, of 1,000. Imagine a world where every child has access to the accumulated wisdom of humanity, where knowledge flows freely across borders, languages, cultures, where the loss of information is as unthinkable as the burning of a city, where we preserve not just the words, but the wisdom, not just the facts, but the understanding. Imagine a civilization that learned from its mistakes, that remembered what it lost and vowed never to lose it again, that built libraries not just of stone and papyrus, but of living minds, of communities of learning, of networks of sharing that span the globe. That world is possible. We're building it, slowly, imperfectly, with setbacks and failures and moments when it seems like we're forgetting again, burning again, losing again. But we're not. We're learning. We're growing. We're becoming the civilization the ancient Alexandrians dreamed of. The Library of Alexandria fell, but its spirit, that hunger to know, that drive to understand, that belief that knowledge is sacred and worth preserving, that spirit never died. It lives in every library, every school, every laboratory, every observatory, every museum, every archive. It lives in every teacher and student, every researcher and scholar, every artist and engineer and philosopher and scientist who dedicates their life to pushing back the darkness of ignorance just a little bit further. It lives in you who listen to this story, who cared enough about the past to wonder what was lost, who felt the wound of Alexandria's burning and wanted to understand. You're part of the library now. You always were. You just needed to remember. So take that memory with you. Take the story of what was lost and what was saved and what we're building. Take the knowledge that knowledge matters, that wisdom is precious, that every generation must choose to preserve what they've learned and pass it on. Take it and add your piece to the great mosaic of human understanding. Teach what you know. Learn what you don't. Ask questions. Seek answers. Wonder at mysteries. Celebrate discoveries. Be the library you want to see in the world. Because the Library of Alexandria didn't really burn on any particular day, in any particular year. It burns or survives in every moment, with every choice we make about what to preserve and what to forget, what to value and what to discard. And right now, in this moment, you get to choose. Will you let the library burn? Or will you be one of the builders, raising it from the ashes, making it stronger, making it last? The scrolls of Alexandria are ash, but the light they held, the light of human curiosity, of intellectual courage, of the unquenchable desire to understand, that light still burns, in libraries around the world, in the minds of teachers and students, in the questions of children who ask why and how and what if. That light is eternal. It can't be destroyed. It can only be dimmed or brightened by our choices. So let it burn bright. Let it illuminate. Let it guide us forward into a future where the loss of knowledge is impossible, where every human being has access to the wisdom of the ages, where the Library of Alexandria isn't a memory, but a present reality, everywhere, always. Let us become the civilization that learns, that remembers, that preserves. Let us become the worthy heirs of Alexandria. The library is calling. It's calling you to read, to learn, to question, to discover, to preserve, to share. Will you answer? The scrolls may be ash, but the fire that burned them, that same fire, transformed, now burns in human hearts as the passion for knowledge. The flame that destroyed is also the flame that illuminates, and as long as that flame burns in even one human heart, the Library of Alexandria lives. So tend your flame, feed it with curiosity and wonder, and the joy of discovery. Protect it from the winds of ignorance and the cold of indifference. Share it with others, so their flames catch light from yours. And together, we'll make a conflagration of knowledge that lights the world. A fire that doesn't consume, but creates. A burning that doesn't destroy, but illuminates. The Library of Alexandria is burning. And this time, that's exactly what we want. A library on fire with curiosity, blazing with understanding, burning bright with wisdom, not consuming itself, radiating outward, lighting the way forward into a future where knowledge is never lost, where wisdom is always preserved, where the light of human understanding shines eternal. That's the real legacy of Alexandria, not what we lost, but what we're building from the ashes. And you, right now, are part of that building. Welcome to the library, the greatest library humanity has ever known, the one we're creating together, today, tomorrow, forever.